The millionaire was paralyzed when he saw his poor pregnant ex-wife cleaning tables at his wedding. The ultimate humiliation. No one in that room knew that the pregnant woman cleaning the tables was the same one who had been there 2 years before. She had slept on the same type of silk sheets, had drunk champagne from the same crystal glasses, and had been the wife of one of the richest men in Monterey. Valentina Salas squeezed a damp cloth between her fingers and kept cleaning, table after table, glass after glass. Her enormous belly brushed the edge of the tablecloth every time she leaned over, and the dull ache in her back had been installed for hours like a tenant who doesn't plan on leaving. 8 months and 3 weeks pregnant, and there she was, in her sky-blue uniform and white apron, working at the most luxurious wedding of the season, her ex-husband's wedding. She hadn't known until she got to the hall that night. The service agency had sent her as part of the team of maids for the event at the Grand Monterey Hotel, the same place where she and Rodrigo had celebrated their first wedding anniversary. When Valentina walked through the doors of Cayoba and saw the white flowers falling from the ceiling like an endless waterfall, when she smelled the mix of roses and imported champagne, something in her chest tightened. But it was when she saw the giant photograph in the main entrance that the world turned beneath her feet. Rodrigo Villanueva Espinoa, and a perfect blonde woman with white teeth and the smile of someone who had never had to clean anything in her life. Valentina didn't run, she didn't cry. She took a deep breath, squeezed the rag, and went to ask which section was hers. Her co-worker, a woman in her 50s named Mrs. Remedios, approached her with an expression of both compassion and astonishment as they placed the last of the flower arrangements on table 12. "Mija, are you sure you can handle this?" she asked quietly, glancing at Valentina's belly. "With all you told me about the baby's father, wouldn't it be better if you told the supervisor that you're not feeling well?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Remedios," Valentina replied without looking up. "I need tonight's money. I can't afford to leave." And it was true. Every peso counted. The apartment she was renting downtown cost $4,500 a month, the prenatal supplements, another $800, and the kindergarten, where she planned to enroll the baby, required an initial deposit that she had yet to complete. The freelance design work that she had been rebuilding from scratch generated irregular income, and the nightly events as a waitress were the bridge that allowed her to stay afloat while her company took off again. Oh man. No one in that room could imagine that behind that blue uniform was a woman who had once run an interior design studio with 8 employees that had decorated penthouses in San Pedro Garza Garcia and residences in Lomas Virreyes, who had been Mrs. Villanueva, the elegant wife who accompanied Rodrigo to business dinners and who everyone considered an indispensable part of his image of success. That was back then, before Rodrigo's family business absorbed all their joint savings in a poorly calculated expansion, before he started showing up late answering with monosyllables, looking at her as if she were a piece of furniture that no longer matched the new decor. Before the night he entered the apartment with a coldness that Valentina had never seen him use before, and said to her, in that flat, executive voice he used in difficult meetings, "This isn't working anymore, Valentina. I need you to leave. The lawyers are going to contact you." She was 30 at the time and had been married for 16 months. The auditorium began filling up a short time after 8 p.m. The guests arrived in perfumed waves, women in designer dresses, men in suits that cost more than Valentina's monthly rent, young men who laughed too loudly and drank too quickly. The team of waitresses circulated with trays of snacks and crystal glasses, invisible to most of the attendees as part of the living furniture of the night. Valentina concentrated on her work, cleaning the spilled champagne stain on the table, replacing the linen napkins on the table, 3, arranging the silverware, silverware that someone had accidentally dislodged. Her body was operating on autopilot, executing movements learned over the months she had been working nightly events, while her mind built silent walls around everything that night meant. It was Mrs. Remedios who warned her with an urgent whisper. "The groom is here, my dear. He's over there near the bar." Valentina didn't turn around immediately. She finished folding the napkin she had in her hands, placed it carefully on the table, and only then did she look up. Rodrigo Villanueva was 40 feet away with his back to her, talking to a group of men, who were laughing uproariously at something he had just said. He had the same bearing as always. Broad shoulders, perfect posture, the black suit that fell on him as if it had been sewn directly onto his body. His hair was slightly longer than when they were together, combed back with that casual elegance that came effortlessly to him. Valentina realized with a strange lucidity that she did not feel what she had feared she would feel. There was nothing. There was no romantic longing. What was there, lodged in the center of her chest like a cold stone, was something much more complex. The memory of what that man had said the last time he spoke to her. "You're a burden, Valentina. You always were." She took a breath, adjusted the cleaning spray on her apron, and went to table 11. The moment happened without her looking for it. Rodrigo turned, laughing at something. He followed one of his friends with his gaze toward the centerpiece's table, and then his eyes swept the room with that casual distraction of someone in their own territory, king of their own celebration, and he stopped. He stopped there. Valentina saw him in her peripheral vision. She didn't turn her head. She continued cleaning table 11 with slow, precise movements, the white cloth gliding over the immaculate tablecloth, her enormous belly perfectly visible under her tight uniform. The silence that formed around Rodrigo was almost audible. Friends he was talking to continued laughing a few more seconds, without noticing that he had ceased to exist in that conversation. One of them patted his arm. Rodrigo didn't react. Doña Remedios, who was passing by with a tray 3 meters away, saw the scene and stopped for just a moment, long enough to register the expression on the groom's face. Later in the kitchen, she would tell the other waitresses that she had never seen a man look like that, as if the floor had opened up beneath his feet and he was falling in slow motion without being able to do anything to stop it. Rodrigo's mouth was slightly open. His eyes, those dark brown eyes that Valentina had looked into for almost 2 years, believing they were sincere, roamed over his ex-wife's figure with an expression that mixed shock, guilt, and something that could be called horror if she allowed herself to name things honestly. The belly, the uniform, the spray bottle, the rag, the table she cleaned at their wedding. Valentina looked up at exactly that moment. Their gazes met. It didn't last more than 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds 2 whole years passed. The night he threw her out, the months of trying to rebuild herself, the day the doctor confirmed the pregnancy, the nights alone with her hand on her belly, the divorce form signed in a law office that smelled of old paper, and also deep in the background, the last night they had been together as husband and wife, neither of them knowing that that night would change everything. Valentina was the first to look away. She sprayed table 12 with the spray and continued cleaning what he didn't know about. There is a cruelty in memories that arrive uninvited. They don't ask permission, they don't announce their arrival. They settle in the middle of a specific task, cleaning a table, setting down a glass, folding a napkin, and suddenly you're no longer in the wedding hall smelling of white roses and French champagne. You're in another place, in another time, and the pain that you thought you had folded and put away in a tightly closed drawer is open in front of you again, as fresh as the first day. Valentina lived that cruelty while she walked to table 13 with her rag and spray. The wedding hall continued to spin around her. Music, laughter, the tinkling of glass. But she was already somewhere else. She was in the living room of her old home from 18 months ago. It was a Tuesday night, but Rodrigo had arrived late, which was no longer the exception but the norm. Valentina had the financial statements from the design studio on the kitchen table, which she had spent months trying to balance. Projects delayed because clients didn't pay on time. 2 employees who were owed last fortnight's wages and a debt to the material supplier that could no longer be postponed. Rodrigo's family business, Villanueva and Asociados Desarrollos, had absorbed almost all of the couple's financial resources over the past year. Rodrigo had presented it as a safe investment, an expansion into the Guadalajara market that would double the family income in 18 months. Valentina had signed what he asked her to sign. She had emptied the savings account that she had had since before they got married, the one she had built project by project during 5 years of freelance work, 180,000 pesos, that were now part of the accounting of a company that was bleeding money faster than he could generate it. "Rodrigo, I need to talk to you," she said when he entered the kitchen and opened the refrigerator without looking at her. "I'm tired, Valentina. I know, but some things can't wait." He grabbed the beer, closed the refrigerator, and finally looked at her with that expression she had learned to recognize and fear. The expression of someone who has already made a decision and is just waiting for the right moment to communicate it. "How much do you need?" he asked, as if her problem was always and exclusively economic, reducible to a number. "It's not just money, it's that the studio is at risk. I need us to be partners in this, Rodrigo. I need you to be present." He put the beer on the bar, put his hands in his pockets, and then came the phrase that Valentina had been repeating in her head for 18 months. The phrase that kept coming to her in her dreams and in her moments of doubt, and on long nights when the baby kicked and she was alone in her apartment wondering if she had done the right thing in not destroying that man with everything she knew. "Valentina, I'll be honest with you because I think you deserve it. This isn't working. You and I aren't working. And frankly, neither is the studio. You're a burden, Valentina. And I can't keep carrying around something that's holding me back." The silence that followed was so thick that Valentina felt like she could touch him. "Auden," she repeated, in a voice so low and still that Rodrigo had to lean in slightly to hear her. "I don't mean this maliciously. I say it as a matter of fact. You have your plans, I have mine. Marriage was a mistake. We both knew it." She wanted to ask him many things. If there was someone else, if this was a sudden decision or something she'd been planning for months, while she still believed they were building something together. If the year and 4 months they had been married had meant anything to him other than a practical arrangement that was no longer convenient. She didn't ask anything. "Okay," she said, and gathered her papers from the kitchen table. That night she slept in the guest room. The following week, Rodrigo's lawyers contacted her. What Rodrigo didn't know, what he doesn't know to this night, happened 4 days before Valentina signed the divorce papers. It was also a Tuesday, as if Tuesdays were the days chosen by fate to change her life without warning. Valentina was at the pharmacy buying painkillers for the headache that had been nagging her for days, and completely mechanically, without thinking, she took a pregnancy test off the shelf, had a strong suspicion, but because her cycle was 2 weeks late and she wanted to rule it out, cross that possibility off her list and move on with the orderly disaster that her life had become. The result took 3 minutes. Valentina looked at him for 20 minutes. 2 unmistakable lines, no possible ambiguity. She sat on the bathroom floor of her new apartment. The small downtown apartment she had moved into with 2 suitcases and a box of books. And she sat there for a long time with the test in her hand and the phone face down on the carpet, thinking. She thought about calling Rodrigo. She considered it seriously for at least 10 minutes. She still had his number saved. She could call him, tell him what the test said, and see what happened, and part of her, the most tired part, the part that hadn't slept well in weeks, the part that had emptied her savings and signed papers without reading all the details because she trusted him, wanted him to know, wanted him to bear some of what was happening. But another part, deeper and colder and more lucid, told her no. If she told Rodrigo she was pregnant before signing the divorce papers, everything would turn into a negotiation. Lawyers, alimony, custody disputes fought over in offices that smelled of bad coffee. Rodrigo appearing and disappearing from his son's life as it suited him. And worst of all, the possibility that he would think she was using him, that the pregnancy was a strategy to keep him or get money from him, that she would build that narrative in her head and believe it. Valentina didn't want that for her son. She wanted something completely different. She wanted that baby to be born into a home where there were no resentments, no legal battles, no father who appeared to be forced by a court. She wanted to rebuild herself first, alone, with her own hands. She wanted that when her son grew up and asked why his father wasn't there, the answer would be simple and honest. Because we made different decisions, and I decided that you and I could handle it on our own. She signed the divorce papers 4 days later. She didn't say anything. The pregnancy was difficult for the first 4 months. Nausea that left her without the strength to sit in front of the computer for more than 2 hours at a time. Sleepless nights. Anemia that the doctor controlled with supplements that had to be taken on a full stomach, even though the stomach rejected everything. Valentina worked from her apartment interior, designing project consults, consulting via video call, and some visual identity work that came to her through recommendations. It still wasn't enough. That's why she started working at night events as a waitress. Not with embarrassment, but with the same practicality with which she would have made any other business decision. It was a reliable income, paid in cash at the end of the event without complicated contracts or 30 day waits. She worked 2 or 3 events a week, saved what she could, and dedicated her days off to building what she had in mind. A new portfolio, an updated network of contacts, a name that was slowly circulating in the right circles again. What Rodrigo also doesn't know, as he sits transfixed in the middle of his own wedding, watching Valentina clean tables, is that in exactly 7 days, she will sign the lease for her new office, a 120 square meter space in the Colonia del Valle with natural light and polished concrete walls that she herself chose because they are the type of texture that always spoke to her of possibilities. Which possibilities? What Rodrigo doesn't know is that Valentina Salas isn't here because she failed. She's here because she chose not to destroy him, and that decision has a cost that she paid for out of her own pocket and with her own body for 9 months. Already. She's here because she's the most capable woman he's ever met, and he was too stupid to see it when he had her in front of him. Look him. Valentina put the folded cloth in her apron and picked up the tray of empty glasses to take them to the kitchen. As she passed the bar, she felt Rodrigo's eyes following her as if they were a physical weight on her back. She avoided him. He never saw her true expression. She pushed open the kitchen door with her hip and continued forward. The baby kicked softly inside her as if reminding her that she was not alone. "I know, my love," Valentina murmured so quietly that no one in the noisy kitchen could hear her. "We're almost done." The Bride and the Poison. Camila Ferreira Montoya had that special gift of women who had been beautiful all their lives and knew it, a confidence. That wasn't confidence but an occupation of space, a certainty that the world fit around them and not the other way around. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a low bun that had taken her 3 hours to do at the salon. and that looked casual. Her wedding dress was imported lace with a plunging neckline and a 2-meter train that 2 assistants had been carrying all night. Her jewelry was diamonds. Her shoes were Louboutin. Her smile was the kind of smile you practice in front of a mirror until it looks natural. She was perfect, in the most superficial and empty sense of the word. Valentina had seen her in photographs during the wedding without knowing then what that name that appeared from time to time on Rodrigo's phone meant. Camila F. An initial. A mystery that she, in her naivete at that time, had decided not to investigate because she trusted him. Because love, when it is honest, does not suspect. And she had loved Rodrigo with the kind of honesty that leaves you completely disarmed when the other person decides to betray you. It was Doña Remedios who got the signal first. "My daughter, the bride is looking at you," he whispered as he passed her with a tray of canapés. And not with good eyes. Valentina didn't need to turn around to confirm it. She felt it. That kind of gaze has its own texture. It's hot at the edges and cold in the center like iron, freshly taken from the fire. The look of someone who has recognized you and is deciding what to do with that information. He continued clearing table 15. Silverware lined up, glasses replaced, napkins folded in a perfect triangle. Camilla's heels clicked on the marble of the room with that deliberate cadence of someone who wants to be heard coming. Valentina counted them unconsciously. 6 steps, 7, 8. They stopped less than 2 meters from her. The voice was high-pitched and well-modulated. The kind of voice that has taken diction lessons. Valentina looked up. Camila Ferreira was looking at her with an expression that was intended to be friendly but wasn't quite pulling it off. Like a disguise that fit her, 2 sizes too small. Her arms were crossed over her chest in a way that pushed her cleavage up and at the same time established a distance, a perimeter. Her eyes, green with perfectly placed false lashes, scanned Valentina from top to bottom with calculated slowness. Her belly, her uniform, the spray, her hands. "You're Valentina," she said. Not as a question. "Yes," Valentina replied, with the same calm with which she would have answered her name in a line at the bank. Camila smiled. It was the coldest smile Valentina had seen in a long time. How interesting. She turned her head slightly toward the group of women nearby, friends of hers, no doubt who had slowed down their conversations to hear better. "Rodrigo told me about you, you know. He told me you were a designer." She paused for just long enough for the contrast to land in the air like a slap in the face. "I guess business wasn't going so well for you." Some of the women nearby lowered their eyes, others didn't. Valentina didn't say anything. "It must be hard," Camilla continued, her voice dropping slightly, but not enough to drown out the sound. "Working like this in your condition? Don't you have anyone to help you? The baby's daddy?" The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has form. Valentina could feel him filling the space between them, thick and charged, as a dozen eyes settled on her, waiting to see how she would respond, waiting to see if she would cry, if she would get angry, if she would say something that would give the material to talk about for the rest of the night. Valentina carefully set the rag down on the table. She looked Camila straight in the eyes. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, in a voice so calm and so complete that for a moment it was Camila who looked uncomfortable. "Enjoy your wedding." And she continued on to table 16. Behind her she heard the immediate murmur of Camila's friends, the readjustment of the situation, the collective interpretation of what had just happened. She also heard, although she didn't want to, Camila's voice, telling someone in a loud voice, just a little lower. "How pathetic, right? Showing up in this state at your ex-husband's wedding. Some women have no dignity." Valentina silently counted to 10. 1. The blue uniform that was hugging her belly. 2. The 84,000 pesos she had saved in her account. 3. The contract she would sign in 7 days. 4. The name she'd already chosen for her son, Mateo. C. The face Camila Ferreira would make if she knew who the woman she had just humiliated in front of her guests really was. 6. The face Rodrigo would make. 7. That neither of them were worth her tears. 8. That Mateo would never see her cry for them. 9. That this night would end. 10. That tomorrow would be another day. She reached table 16 and began to clean. It was at that moment, at the precise moment when the rag touched the tablecloth of table 16, that the pain hit. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't a discomfort that grew little by little and gave her time to prepare herself. It was a brutal, sudden contraction that it went through her lower back like an electric current and went up to her abdomen with an intensity that stopped her breathing in half. Valentina grabbed the edge of the table. The spray fell to the floor with a dull thud that no one heard because the music kept going, and the conversations kept going, and the world of that wedding kept spinning completely oblivious to what was happening at table 16. My daughter. Mrs. Remedios appeared at her side in 1900 seconds. She had the instincts of women who have given birth and have seen birth, that antenna that detects without the need for words. "I'm fine," Valentina said, although her voice came out different, thinner. "You're not fine." Mrs. Remedios was already taking the tray from her hands. "When was the last contraction?" "It's not a contraction. It's just another wave, stronger than the last." Valentina gritted her teeth, bent over slightly, instinctively protecting herself. Bia. Her free hand went straight to her belly. Mateo, who had been relatively still for hours, moved in a different way than she had, always, a kind of urgent adjustment that Valentina felt in her bones. "It's too soon," she murmured, and there was something in her voice that hadn't been there all night. Fear. Not the controlled fear of someone facing humiliation with dignity, real fear. Mateo was 36 weeks, premature but viable, but not here. Not now. Not in this room full of people who didn't know her and didn't care about her. "I'm going to call the supervisor," Mrs. Remedios said, and she was already moving. What happened in the next 2 minutes was simultaneous and chaotic in the silent way that real emergencies are chaotic. No shouting or drama, but an urgent efficiency that contrasted with the festive normalcy of the environment. The event supervisor appeared. Someone called the emergency number. Mrs. Remedio held Valentina by the arm, with a firmness that felt like an anchor. And then the music stopped. Not completely, not all at once, but it stopped long enough to create that space of silence that, in large rooms, sounds like a collective sigh, ikrai, kile. And in that space of silence, heads turned toward Valentina, toward the pregnant waitress, who was bent over table 16, pale and clutching the edge of the tablecloth, with the spray can on the floor, and her eyes closed. And among all those heads that turned, there were two that Valentina didn't see, but who saw her. One was Camila Ferreira, who from the other side of the room was watching the scene with an expression that began as irritation. What was happening at her wedding? What scandal was that? And that gradually transformed into something different, less defined, when someone next to her whispered in her ear what was happening. The other was Rodrigo Villanueva, who was already walking. The collapse. Rodrigo Villanueva had made difficult decisions all his life. He had closed deals that other men didn't dare close. He had signed contracts, knowing that they involved risks that could sink him. He had fired employees, terminated partnerships, and on one occasion had called his own father to tell him that his participation in the company was no longer viable. He was a man who did not freeze. It was, in fact, One of his most valued traits in Monterey business circles, the ability to remain cool when everything around him was heating up and was heating up. But that was in meetings, in negotiations, in spaces where the rules were known and the board was visible, yada. This was something else. He crossed the room in 12 steps that he would not remember taking. The noise of the wedding, the music, the conversations, the perpetual clinking of glasses became a dull and irrelevant hum, like the sound of the world when you are under water. All he could see was Valentina's figure, in the background, bent over the table, pale with her hand on her belly, with the event supervisor next to her talking on the phone, and the older woman holding his arm, looking around for help. Valentina. Her voice came out differently than he expected. It wasn't the executive voice, the commanding voice. It was something else, older, more frightened. She raised her eyes to him, and in that fraction of a second that their eyes met, Rodrigo saw something he hadn't seen in the short time he had been watching her that night. Real vulnerability. Not the vulnerability that shows itself, but the kind that leaks out without permission, the kind that appears when the body stops obeying the instructions of the mind. "I don't need anything from you," she said. Her voice was firm, though it was difficult. "The ambulance is coming," the supervisor said, putting the phone away. "A few minutes." "I don't need an ambulance." Valentina tried to straighten up, and another contraction doubled her over again, longer than the previous ones, more insistent. "I just need," she didn't finish the sentence. The pain wouldn't let her. Doña Remedios looked her in the eyes with the calm clarity of someone who has been in this moment before. "My daughter, the baby is coming. We have to go to the hospital." Rodrigo was already by her side. He sought no permission, no approval. He put his hand on Valentina's back with that clumsy, irrefutable instinct of someone who doesn't know what to do but knows he has to do something. And Valentina, who would have wanted to reject him, didn't have the strength at that moment to waste on pride. Every available energy was being redirected inward toward Mateo, toward the only thing that mattered. The room, which had continued to function with that festive inertia that big events have, began to register the situation. First in murmurs, then in silences that gradually opened up like circles in water, heads turning, conversations pausing in the middle of a sentence. Camilla appeared before they reached the exit. She stood in front of Rodrigo with an expression that had gone from bewilderment to fury in the time it took him to cross the room. She held the train of her dress in her hand, gathered up urgently, and her eyes shone with something that wasn't quite tears, but wasn't cold either. "What are you doing?" she asked Rodrigo, her voice low enough so that not everyone could hear, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Rodrigo, it's our wedding." "She's in labor, Camila." "That's not your problem. Call someone else, call anyone, but you can't. She's my ex-wife." "Exactly, ex-wife." "Do you know what that word means?" Valentina, who would have preferred not to exist in that exchange, gritted her teeth against another contraction and concentrated on breathing. Doña Remedios was holding her arm. The event supervisor was on the phone again, coordinating the ambulance to enter. "Rodrigo," Valentina said with her eyes still closed, "stay. It's your wedding. I can do it myself." He didn't answer. She opened her eyes and found him looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully decipher. There was guilt in it, it was obvious. But there was something else, something he himself seemed to be processing in real time, as if he were solving an equation whose answer changed everything. "I'm not going to leave you alone," he said. "Rodrigo." Camila's voice now had a cutting edge. "If you walk out that door, Camila." Rodrigo's voice was quiet and definitive, like a door closing. "Please." It was the please that silenced Camila. Not because it was a plea, but because it sounded like the exact opposite, like the last consideration he was extending to her before make a decision no matter what she said. The ambulance arrived 3 minutes later. The interior of the ambulance smelled of antiseptic and new plastic. Valentina lay on the stretcher, her eyes fixed on the white ceiling, counting the seconds. Tone contractions. 4 minutes. Then 3.5. The paramedic had attached a fetal monitor to her belly, and the sound of Mateo's heart filled the small space like a fast but steady metronome. Stable. Which meant he was fine. Still fine. Rodrigo was sitting on the side bench with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped together, staring at the ground. He had left his own wedding without the suit jacket that someone had taken from him during the confusion of the departure. His white shirt with the black bow tie undone at the neck. His polished shoes stained with something he didn't want to identify. The paramedic was taking vital signs and talking to dispatch. The city lights outside flickered intermittently, appearing as fleeting glimpses through the opaque windows of the ambulance. Valentina turned her head toward him. "You didn't have to come." "I know," he said without looking up from the ground. "You ruined your wedding." Silence. Just Mateo's heartbeat on the monitor and the sound of the engine and the traffic lights outside. Rodrigo. He looked up. Valentina looked at him for a moment. She considered what she was going to say. She thought about the small apartment, the signed forms, the pregnancy test on the bathroom floor, the months of silence. She thought about Mateo kicking his feet at night. She thought about the 84,000 pesos she had saved. She thought about the office she would sign in 7 days. She thought about whether now was the time. She decided there was no point in keeping it inside. "The baby is yours," she said, and her voice didn't shake. It was a simple, clean sentence spoken with the same calm with which she could have said it was going to rain. The interior of the ambulance became absolutely still. Rodrigo looked at her without saying anything. The paramedic discreetly moved to the back of the room and pretended to check something in his briefcase. "What?" Rodrigo said. The word came out breathless. "That the baby is yours. I found out 4 days before I signed the divorce papers. I decided not to tell you." "Why?" Valentina looked at the ceiling again. Another contraction. Let her pass. 3 minutes between each one. The birth was speeding up. "Because I didn't want you to think it was a trap, because I didn't want to fight you for anything. Because I decided that I could do it on my own, and indeed I can." She paused. "I'm telling you now because you deserve to know before the baby is born. Not because I need something from you." Rodrigo didn't respond for a long moment. When he did, his voice was that of a man whose whole life he'd spent a long time building with the wrong materials had just been torn down. "Valentina, I didn't say it," she said, quiet. "Not tonight. Right now, all that matters is that Mateo makes it safely." Rodrigo closed his mouth, nodded, and for the first time in the 2 years they'd been together and they'd been apart, Rodrigo Villanueva did exactly what Valentina needed. He kept quiet and let her be the most important person in the room. The ambulance turned into the emergency room entrance of the Christus Muguerza Hospital, and the back doors swung open onto the cool Monterey night. Outside, in the Grand Hotel, Rodrigo and Camila's wedding was still going on. The music had returned. The champagne was still flowing. The guests had shaped the evening's narrative, as guests always do, turning chaos into anecdote, drama, into dinner table conversation. Camila Ferreira sat alone at the head table, a glass in her hand, her eyes fixed on the door her boyfriend had exited through. Her phone had 12 unread messages. The truth is world-shattering. Hospital waiting rooms have a brutal honesty that no other place in the world possesses. They don't allow masks. They don't allow the kind of comfortable social distancing that people build in offices and ballrooms and business meetings. in a hospital waiting room at 11:15 at night with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the smell of disinfectant pervading every corner. Human beings are exactly who they are, mille bifar. No suits, no champagne, no background music to soften the edges. Rodrigo Villanueva had been sitting in a navy blue plastic chair for 40 minutes, his white wedding shirt rolled up to his elbows, and the black ribbon hanging loosely around her neck, looking at the gray metal door through which they had taken Valentina. Beside her, in another identical plastic chair, Mrs. Remedios knitted in silence, with a calm and constant speed, as if she had decided that the only sensible response to emergencies was knitting. She had insisted on accompanying them because, as she said, someone with a sense had to be here. Rodrigo had not protested. His phone had vibrated 27 times since they entered the hospital. He had 16 messages from Camilla, 4 from his partner Gerardo asking what had happened, 3 from his mother, who had evidently already heard something, and several more from numbers that he did not recognize and did not open. He had placed it face down on his knee after the 10th message and had not looked at it again. He was thinking about what Valentina had said to him in the ambulance. "The baby is yours. I found out 4 days before signing the divorce papers. I decided not to tell you anything." The sentence spun around in his head with that persistence of things that changed the architecture of everything you thought you understood. Rodrigo is a man of numbers, of structures, of verifiable causes and effects. But this didn't fit into any of his categories. Valentina had known she was pregnant before signing the divorce papers. She had carried that information alone for 9 months. She had worked as a waitress at nightclubs with an 8-month-old belly while he was organizing his wedding to another woman. And he hadn't said anything. Not to hurt her, not to use her as leverage, but for exactly the opposite reason, to avoid using her as leverage, to avoid turning that baby into a bargaining tool, to protect his son from a war that he himself had started, with that phrase that continued to echo in the corners of his conscience like a sentence that had no statute of limitations. "You are a burden, Valentina." Rodrigo closed his eyes. In the 18 months they had been divorced, he had constructed an orderly narrative about what had happened in their marriage. A narrative in which he was a practical man who had recognized a fundamental incompatibility in time, in which Valentina was a talented but unstable woman whose business was failing, and whose presence complicated his life more than it enriched it. It was a comfortable narrative, true to himself, the kind that allowed him to sleep well and look in the mirror without too much difficulty. Now that narrative had a hole so big that the other side was visible. "It's the first time he's going to be a father." Doña Remedios' voice pulled him out of his thoughts. She continued knitting without looking at him, with that peripheral concentration of people who can do several things at once. "Yes," Rodrigo said. "You can tell," she said without particular inflection. It was neither an insult nor a consolation. It was an observation. "She told him about me?" he asked, and he wasn't quite sure why he asked. Perhaps because Doña Remedios was the only available link to the months Valentina had lived without him knowing anything. "Not much." Doña Remedios changed the color of thread with an expert movement. "She told me that the baby's father wasn't in the picture, that it was her decision, that it was fine that way." A pause. "Valentina isn't one to complain, you know. She arrives, works, does things right, and leaves. I never asked her for more details because she didn't offer them." Rodrigo processed that silently. "Do you know his name?" "Who? The baby?" "Yes." "Mateo," said Mrs. Remedios, and something in the way she pronounced that name, simple and complete, made Rodrigo feel something he wasn't fully prepared to feel, the concrete and physical reality that there was a specific human being with a name, already chosen, who was half of him, and who had existed for 9 months without him knowing it. Mateo. The gray metal door opened 20 minutes later. The doctor who came out was a man in his 50s in a green coat with a professionally calm expression. He looked at Rodrigo, who had stood up before the door had even opened, and then at Mrs. Remedios, quickly assessing who was who in the room. "Mrs. Valentina Salas' family?" "Me," Rodrigo said. The doctor looked at him with a brief assessing expression, noting the wedding dress, the loose bun, the time of night. The delivery was quick but without complications. "The mother is doing well, stable, resting. The baby was born at 11:47. Weighing 2,700 grams, 36 weeks and 2 days of gestation." A brief pause. "He is in the standard precaution incubator for late preterm infants, but his signs are good. Lungs functional, reflexes strong." The doctor extended his hand. "Congratulations, Dad." The handshake lasted 3 seconds. It took Rodrigo another 5 to fully process the 2 words, Dad. Mrs. Remedios, who was still sitting with her, knitting on her lap, quietly exhaled something that could have been a prayer or could have simply been relief. Rodrigo sat down again. Or rather, his knees made the decision for him. He sat down in the navy blue plastic chair and put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands and remained still while something that had been held together for 18 months with the tension of denial finally broke without a sound. He didn't cry right away. It was a slower process than that. A pressure that grew behind his eyes, a contraction in his throat, and finally, without him being able or willing to stop it, 2 tears that fell onto the white marble floor of the hospital. Mrs. Remedios continued knitting. She didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the only right way to be there for someone. 40 minutes later, a nurse led them down a long, white hallway to the room where Valentina had been transferred. Rodrigo went in alone, because Mrs. Remedios said she was waiting outside and that, if anyone needed coffee, they could let him know. Valentina was lying down with her bed slightly elevated, her hair tied back in an improvised braid and her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. She had the color of someone who had just walked through something huge with her body. Pale, with dark circles under her eyes, but with an expression that was not exhaustion but something else. Something more like the stillness of someone who had just arrived at a place they had been searching for a long time. In the small incubator next to the bed, Mateo slept with his fists clenched. Rodrigo stopped at the door. He looked at the baby for a time he could not measure. He was small, much smaller than he had imagined in the 40 minutes in the waiting room in which his mind had been constructing images without sufficient material. He had slightly pink skin, a round face, and that expression of absolute concentration that newborns have when they are sleeping, as if existing were a job that required all available attention. "You can come closer," Valentina said without looking at him. Rodrigo approached the incubator, stood 30 centimeters from the glass, looking at Mateo with an expression that Valentina, who was looking at him now, had never seen on him before. It wasn't the expression of Rodrigo, the businessman, nor that of Rodrigo, the distant husband, nor that of Rodrigo, the cold man who had told her she was a burden. It was the expression of someone who has just understood something fundamental about himself and about the world, and that this understanding makes him simultaneously smaller and greater. "Valentina," he said, in the voice of the ambulance, the old and frightened voice. "Yes," she didn't say. "Be still, not tonight. I already told you. I need to ask for your forgiveness. I know. Pause. And someday you'll do it right when I'm ready to hear it. But tonight, I'm not your interlocutor, Rodrigo. Tonight, I'm Mateo's mother, and that's all I am, and all I need to be." Rodrigo looked at her for a long moment. He nodded. "Can I stay a while?" he asked, and there was something in the question that she recognized. This wasn't the Rodrigo who took up space. This was someone who asked for permission because he finally understood that Valentina's spaces belonged to her. Valentina looked at Matteo, then at Rodrigo. 1 hour, he said. Rodrigo took the chair by the window and sat in silence. And for the first time in 2 years, they were in the same room without either of them having to defend themselves from the other. The empire she had built all by herself. There's one thing people don't understand about rebuilding from scratch, and that is that it doesn't happen in a linear fashion. It's not a straight line that goes up from left to right in an orderly graph. It's more like a thunderstorm scattered chaotic energy that hits from multiple directions at the same time, and that only from a distance. Once it has passed it, can you see that there was a pattern? Valentina Salas had started rebuilding herself at the worst possible time. 30 years old, recently divorced, without the savings that had taken her 5 years to build, with a design studio that had lost 2 of its 3 most important clients during the months of instability in the marriage, and without anyone else knowing yet, with a baby growing inside her that would change all calculations of available time and energy. Any sensible person would have told her to wait, to stabilize herself first, to find a steady job with benefits, and leave the entrepreneurship until she had more footing. Valentina was not irrational. She considered it for exactly a week, the week after the divorce, as she did the math at the table in her new apartment with a cup of tea cooling beside her. Then she saved the math and opened her computer. What Rodrigo did not know as he sat in the hospital chair watching his son sleep was everything that had happened in those 18 months. The full story, not the visible fragment he had witnessed that night. The pregnant waitress bussing tables. That fragment was real, but it was the smallest chapter in a much larger story. The first month after the divorce, Valentina contacted every client she had had in the last 3 years, not to ask them directly for a job, but to tell them that the firm was restructuring and that she was still available for projects. Of the 12 she contacted, 4 responded with interest. With those 4, she built the bridge. The second month, with the pregnancy still invisible under her clothes, she took on 2 interior design projects simultaneously. The remodeling of an executive suite in a boutique hotel in the Obispo neighborhood, and the redesign of the boardroom of a law firm in San Pedro. She worked 12 hours a day. She ate well because the baby needed it. She slept enough because the baby needed it. Everything else was secondary. In the third month, when her belly began to be visible, she made a decision that at that time was harder than any other to be completely transparent with her clients. She told them that she was pregnant, that the baby would arrive in approximately 6 months, that she had a detailed work plan that guaranteed the delivery of all projects before the estimated due date, and that if that represented a problem for them, she understood perfectly. None of them canceled. One, the director of the boutique hotel, told her something that she kept as if it were a document, important. Valentina, people who know what they're doing don't stop knowing what they're doing just because they're pregnant. Keep going. She kept going. The nightly events as a waitress began in the 5th month, when the studio's income still wasn't stable enough to cover all the fixed expenses, plus the prenatal supplements, plus the savings she needed for the initial deposit for kindergarten and the birth expenses. It wasn't her main activity. It was the supplement that allowed her not to touch the capital she was rebuilding. She worked 2 or 3 events a week, arrived at her apartment at midnight, showered, checked pending emails, and slept. She didn't complain, not out loud and not silently either, because Valentina had decided from the beginning that this baby would not be born into an environment of resentment or victimhood. Matteo was going to be born into a home where his mother was a woman who solved problems, not a woman who got lost in them. What Rodrigo also didn't know was the project that Valentina had been building in parallel for the last 8 months. It was called VCL Studio. It wasn't just a rebranding of the previous studio. It was something new. It was something new built with a different business architecture. While the first studio relied on individual projects and direct clients, BSAL Studio would operate with a hybrid model. High-end interior design projects for premium clients, plus a corporate image consulting line for mid-sized companies that wanted to update their spaces without paying the fees of big firms. The idea had been born one sleepless night in the 7th month when Mateo wouldn't let her sleep, and she was sitting in the living room of her apartment with her laptop on her lap reviewing financial projections. She had realized something that seemed obvious in hindsight. The interior design market in Monterrey was completely polarized. Up top, international firms with budgets that most companies wouldn't be able to afford. Down below, independent designers without the structure to handle large-scale projects. In the middle, a huge space that no one was filling properly. Val Studio was going to fill that space over the next few months, while continuing to work on active projects and hosting waitressing events on the weekends. Valentina built the business plan, the Val Studio, with the same precision and care with which she designed a space. Every element in its place, every decision backed by data, nothing left to chance or unverified intuition. She hired a junior designer to begin working with her remotely from the 7th month of her pregnancy. She registered the company name in the 8th. She signed the preliminary contract for the space in Colonia, 120 square meters of open floor plan with natural light that would be available exactly the week Mateo was born or the following. She built an initial portfolio of 4 confirmed clients for the studio, 2 office redesign projects, a boutique hotel in Torreon that had found her through a recommendation, and a regional chain of medical clinics that needed to unify the image of its 4 branches in Monterrey. The total value of those 4 initial contracts was 1,300,000 pesos. 1,300,000 pesos that Valentina had achieved on her own, pregnant, working nights, at events in a blue uniform with cleaning spray without telling anyone what he was building. Rodrigo would discover it gradually in the weeks follow. Mari's matcha birth in the brief formal visits Valentina allowed him to the hospital and then to the department. De Paris. He would discover it in fragments. The computer opened to a spreadsheet of projections. The name VSAL Studio in an email notification that accidentally passed him by. A call that Valentina took with an executive ease that he immediately recognized as that of someone who was managing something big. One day, unable to contain himself, he asked her directly, "What is VSAL Studio?" Valentina looked at him with a completely neutral expression. "My company. When did you found it?" "It's been under construction for 8 months. The office opens next week." Rodrigo processed that. He did the math involuntarily. The hardest business habit to break. "Do you have clients?" 4 confirmed contracts. A brief pause. $1,300,000 in the initial pipeline. Rodrigo didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said in a voice that had several overlapping layers that he himself couldn't have fully separated. "Valentina, I told you you were a burden." "I know," she said without cruelty or softness, just as a verifiable fact. "You were wrong." She got up to breastfeed Mateo, who had begun to move in his crib, and said nothing more. She didn't need to say anything more. Justice without revenge. Revenge, Valentina had learned in the deepest way possible. It's a luxury you can't afford when you have something more important to build. It's not an abstract moral virtue, or a lesson someone teaches you in a book. It's a practical decision, taken cold, with the same logic with which you decide what to invest your energy in and what not to. Revenge consumes, and Valentina had no energy available to spend on Rodrigo Villanueva. What she did have was Mario and Besurio, and 120 square pesos, and 120 square Tilvie in the Colonia del Valle, with natural light and polished concrete walls that they opened on a Tuesday, exactly 12 days after the birth of her son, Widier. Valentina was not present at the opening because she was at home breastfeeding a 12-day-old baby who slept in 2-hour intervals. But her junior designer, Paola, opened the door with the key that Valentina had given her the day before and sent her a photo of the empty space with the morning light coming in through the windows. In a folder named Proof of Worth, Valentina securely saved this important document. Camila Ferreira disappeared from Rodrigo's life 3 weeks after the wedding that never ended up being a wedding. It was not a long or especially dramatic process in the sense that people imagine when they think of couples breaking up wealthy. It was efficient, almost surgical, with the coolness of someone assessing a situation and deciding that the cost already outweighs the benefit. Camila was many things, but she was no fool. She quickly understood the arithmetic of what had happened that night. Rodrigo had left his own wedding to accompany his ex-wife to the hospital. That ex-wife had just given birth to his son, the son he didn't know he had. There were things a woman could forgive. There were things that weren't worth even trying to forgive. Camila chose the latter category. She returned the ring by certified courier, a detail that Rodrigo interpreted for what it was, a statement that she wasn't going to appear in person because appearing in person implied giving space for conversation. And Camila had no interest in that conversation. She attached a 4-line handwritten note that said in perfect handwriting redolent of the same image courses that had given her the modulated voice. I don't compete with the children. Good luck with what you've built. And she went to spending a month at her family's home in Merida, where her friends organized a series of supportive dinners for her, and where, according to Rodrigo's knowledge from third parties, she had been completely fine from day one. But Rodrigo didn't call her. What he did do, in the days that followed, was sit with the real consequences of his own decisions and stare at them without looking away, which was considerably more difficult than in any negotiation he had faced in his professional life. He called his lawyer to establish a legal acknowledgement of paternity. He called his accountant to arrange child support that would be far above what any judge could have ordered him to pay, because he wanted it to be clear from the beginning that this was not an obligation he was fulfilling under legal pressure, but a responsibility he assumed by choice. He called his mother and explained everything to her with the same executive coolness with which he would have explained a corporate restructuring, and he endured the 20 minutes of silence and questions and gentle reproaches that followed because they were also the result of his own decisions. What he didn't do was call Valentina to ask her to give him a second chance. No, because he hadn't thought about it. He had thought about it, probably more than he was honest with himself. But Valentina had said something to him in the hospital, which had stuck with him with an accuracy he hadn't been able to ignore. Someday you're going to do it right when I'm ready to hear it. When she was ready. No, when he wanted to. When she was ready. Rodrigo, for the first time in his adult life, decided to wait for someone else's time. The visits to see Mateo began 2 weeks after he was discharged from the hospital with clear rules that Valentina established and that Rodrigo accepted without negotiation. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, 2 hours each time, in Valentina's apartment, no surprise visits and no exceptions. If he had a meeting, he would reschedule it. If he had a business commitment, he would move it. Mateo wasn't an activity that fit into the gaps in the calendar. He was the priority, and that meant that the calendar was organized around him. Rodrigo did it. Not perfectly, not from the first day. There was a Tuesday when he arrived, 20 minutes late, due to a call that went on forever, and the look on Valentina's face when she opened the door was enough to make sure it didn't happen again. There was another day when she tried to bring an unreasonably expensive gift, an imported stroller that cost more than the monthly rent for the apartment. And Valentina rejected it with the same calmness with which she rejected everything that smelled of financial compensation instead of real presence. What Matteo needed, he said, can't be bought. You'll learn later. Rodrigo was learning. It was the most difficult and important process of his life, more difficult than any business. This expansion more demanding than any negotiation he had ever closed. Learning to be present in the right way, to listen instead of directing, to occupy the space that belonged to him without invading the one that wasn't his. Learning that being a father was not a title that was acquired through biology, but a daily practice that was built or destroyed in the small details. Matteo, oblivious to all that adult complexity, grew with the astonishing speed of babies who decide that the world is an interesting place. First the smile, then the eye tracking, then the hand that closed around the finger with a strength disproportionate to its size. The first time Matteo looked him directly in the eyes and smiled, Rodrigo had to step out onto the balcony for a moment. Huesal. Studio billing 200,000 pesos in its first year of operations. It was an accident, the result of 18 months of work built on the margins of everything else, of decisions made with precision when it would have been much easier to collapse, of a woman who had decided that her story was not going to end the moment someone told her she was a burden. Recognition came in a way that Valentina had least expected and most deserved. Expansion magazine contacted her in the 10th month of VBS operations at the studio for a profile on women entrepreneurs in the north of the country. Valentina hesitated. Then she said yes, because Paola told her it would be good for the business, and because Mrs. Remedios, whom Valentina had hired as a part-time administrative assistant with a salary that made her cry with gratitude, told her, with her usual practicality, "My daughter, tell the world what you did, not out of pride, but so that other women know that it can be done." The photo shoot was on a Wednesday afternoon at the office in Colonia del Valle. Valentina arrived with Matteo because it was her day to have him, and the photographer, a young man with a good eye, captured the moment without asking. Valentina sitting at her concrete and wood desk with Matteo in her arms and the city of Monterrey behind the windows, looking at the camera with an expression that wasn't exactly a smile, but it was something more complete than that. It was certainty. That was the cover photo. The headline read, "Valentina Salas, the businesswoman who built $1 million from scratch and did it with her son in her arms." Rodrigo saw the magazine on a Thursday afternoon in Valentina's apartment while he was waiting for her to finish a work call so he could start his time with Matteo. It was on the living room table, open to the profile page. He picked it up without thinking. He read it all, standing without moving, while Matteo slept in the stroller next to the couch. When Valentina came out of her room with the phone still in her hand, she found him like that, standing in the room with the magazine in his hands and an expression she had never seen on his face. It wasn't guilt. He'd been there before. It was something closer to genuine recognition, to a real, belated understanding of what he'd had right in front of him for 16 months and had been too nearsighted to see. "Valentina," he said. "You're going to start now," she said, picking up the diaper bag and setting it next to the stroller. "No," he set the magazine down carefully on the table. "I just want you to know that I'm proud of you." A pause. Not as if he had any right to be, as someone who watches from the outside and recognizes him because it's impossible not to. Valentina looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," he said. And it was a simple thank you, without edges, without irony. The kind of thank you you give someone when they say exactly the right thing in exactly the right way. She picked up her bag, gave Mateo, who was still asleep, a kiss on the forehead, and headed out to her 5 a.m. meeting. Rodrigo stayed with his son. And outside, at newsstands all over town, the expansion cover showed a woman with a baby in her arms, and the city of Monterrey in the background, looking at the world with wide eyes, a woman who knows exactly who she is and exactly where she is going. No one who saw her would have imagined that 9 months ago, that same woman would have been cleaning tables at a wedding in a blue uniform and spray cleaning, and no one who saw her would have doubted for a second that she had always been, from the beginning, the most important person in any room she had been in.